Pete Yost here for the Unbuild It podcast with a word about our sponsor, Huber Engineered Woods. There are really three reasons why I think Huber Engineered Woods stands out, and it's a big part of why they're a sponsor of our Unbuild It podcast. First, they develop systems of products. The products are compatible and integrated. Makes our jobs a lot more easy in the field and when specifying. Second is superior tech support. There are really good website resources that they have developed for the application of their products, but they also have an outstanding 800 numbered tech team that really knows their stuff. And the last is a really active technical research and development team with whom I've done a lot of work over the years, and I have a lot of faith in the information I get from them when I have questions about product performance. So that's it. That's our high performance sponsor. Now on to the podcast.
I'm Jake Bruton, and welcome to the Unbuild It podcast. Today I'm joined with my regular cohorts and co-hosts, Steve Basic.
Hello.
And Peter Yost.
Morning.
And apparently, you can't say morning. They could be listening to this in the evening.
Well,
good day to you all.
And apparently Steve's not awake yet, since he's just like, meh.
fully awake.
Don't poke the bear this early in the morning. Is that what we're saying?
Fully awake.
Okay. Today's topic is control or indoor air quality, but I think about it as control. So where I thought that this conversation starts is something that we've talked about a dozen different times. It's air sealing and the control layers and making sure that we're creating an environment where we have good enough control that we actually can start to nitpick indoor air quality rather than we live in a super leaky house and the air quality inside is just whatever the air quality outside is mixed with our cat farting. Does that seem fair? Like, go back and listen to our podcast on air sealing, the 4 control layers, all those sorts of things before we get to this point.
Sounds good.
All those things lead to this conversation.
Yeah, I like, John Straub has a really good slide that he uses on environmental separation. And, we're just trying to create a different controlled environment than we have outdoors. But it is kind of weird, that we talk about making better connections with outdoors in some ways, but in other ways we want to make completely separate environments. So there's tension there, I think. But and I just always have to say that when we're talking about indoor air quality, the broader topic is indoor environmental quality. And Robert Bean, the mechanical engineer from Canada, healthyheating.com, has some great stuff on how to broaden the definition from indoor air quality to indoor environmental quality. But we're talking about the air quality portion of it today.
Yep.
Right?
And so we've been in our house that I built for my family for like a year and a half, and we very rarely open the windows. The temperature doesn't fluctuate quickly, so there's no like, oh, it's hot in here, let's open the windows because it's cooling off outside sort of thing. And we constantly talk about, oh, it's nice out. Then we should go outside and sit on the porch or in the backyard rather than try to make the inside the same as the outside. Although, even though I live close to a decent sized thoroughfare, the indoor air quality or the outdoor air quality in Columbia, Missouri is pretty darn good too. It's not like we're fighting off major pollutants outside the way that we would be if we lived near an interstate in Chicago or something like that. So let's talk about the pollutants that we would be worried about first, and then that can drive our conversation. I broke it into 4 categories. Moisture, VOCs, carbon monoxide, and radon. And that was like the 4 that I could come up with. So we have to go to the source, right? We have to start with where's it coming from and can we eliminate it? So if we look at moisture, because that's a big one, because we always start with moisture. In my house, there's a lot of plants, which means there's 4 or 5 cups of water that just get dumped around in different rooms throughout the day. Humidifiers, which is a weird one, but we looked at a house yesterday that had a humidifier. I don't think I've ever built a house that I wanted to put a humidifier in.
Yeah.
I would much rather argue for a dehumidifier for a big part of the year than a humidifier, and tell people, you can just have a couple more houseplants in the winter, and that'll help you not be so dry. Building materials that are still drying. We've talked about this one, construction moisture.
Yep.
Concrete that's letting off moisture, drywall, framing materials, paints. We turn houses over in 3 or 4 months. There's not much in there that's dry. Are you looking at my cheat sheet? Don't look at my cheat sheet. Steve's proving that he can read upside down. Leaks, bulk water leaks, or an air leak that causes condensation because of temperature difference. I have unvented and poorly vented gas appliances, which are like, that could be a real problem other than moisture, but they're on that for moisture. Outside air that's getting in, leaving a window open during the day while it's raining, then closing everything up at night. And then it's you and 3 dogs and the bedroom door's closed. And now it feels like it's a stuffy sauna in there because of all the off-gassing from, or the exhalation from all those animals combined with high levels. And then Pete's favorite. Do you want to read that, Pete? Oh, you don't have your glasses
My glasses. Oh, firewood.
Firewood. So tell us the firewood story that you talk about in your presentation about indoor moisture while we're
here. Well, the one in particular I remember, which was quite early on, was a family that took a 3-season cottage on Cowpath 440 in Vermont. They actually have named several roads. Cowpath 440 is just outside Brattleboro. I think I'm getting the number right. But I think it's abbreviated CP or something. You know how they do TH or whatever it is for different rural routes. But this was CP. And I said, what's CP 440? He goes, oh, that's Cowpath 440. I thought, man, if you want to describe podunk, you just talk about Cowpath 440.
Cowpath onto the name.
So they took this 3-season cottage and turned it into a deep energy retrofit. And they said, man, this is crazy. We got water streaming down the windows. We have no idea what's going on. So I came out and, I'm walking the outside of the house. No, you got to look at the water and the condensation on the inside. I got to figure out where the water's coming from. And they did a good job on the flashing, and they had drainage away from the property. So I walked into the basement and I just pulled out my invoice and started filling it out. And he goes, what are you doing? I said, well, how much wood do you have stored in the basement here? He goes, oh, about 3 cords, I think. And I said, yeah, well, how's that work out for you? He goes, oh, the wood dries out great.
Yeah, because it goes into the house.
And then it's like you can see, like, the wood dries out great. Oh. So it's about 600 to 800 pounds of water per cord. It's not a small amount.
For a drying season.
For a drying season. And you can't store that much wood inside. And of course, had they stored the wood there in the past? Sure they had. But it was all getting out, because it was a leaky house. You tighten the house up and make it better insulated, and you no longer can have 1,800 pounds of water leaving the building.
So sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so there's a blog that I wrote on household moisture that has a table of all the occupant, centered loads that you have to keep track of. And the really interesting thing to me is that I sometimes when I teach will leave it blank and say, pick how much water you think is generated by a shower based on all the other ones in the list. And people always go like, 4 pounds of water or at least 2 pounds of water. It's a half a pound of water per typical shower, which is incredibly low.
So my daughter is 3.5 pounds because she'll take a 45-minute shower at the hottest setting.
There is that. But
she can make the bathroom walls look like they're sweating for how long she stays in there.
But that's the thing with the typical shower. The reason we think it's a lot is because we see it. Yep. And all the other sources, we don't see it. And that's the real issue. But you mentioned unvented gas appliances. We talked about this the last time in terms of 90,000 BTUs as a therm, and that's 1 gallon of water that's coming from burning that stuff, and you never see it until it's collecting in your attic or something.
So I thought for each one of these 4 categories, we would do what you're just doing. Let's talk about how to get rid of these issues before we move on to the second category. But I have an aside. There was a thing going around a few years ago about how to find out what your adult film star name would be, because you don't use your real name in adult films. It's the street you grew up on as your last name, and your first name is your childhood pet's name. So mine would be Mr. Jingles, Rural Route 7. Just so The Cowpath made me think of somebody's
Can
name
you
is
imagine?
Cowpath 44.
Yeah, that would
Mr.
be like,
Jingles,
ooh,
Rural Route 7.
I really want to see who that is.
Okay, so
You come up with, like, where do you find this stuff? I don't get it.
both of those are false. I didn't grow up on Rural Route 7, and I didn't have a pet named Mr. Jingles. I just think it would be hilarious for it to be that. So you're not going to convince people to not have plants because plant people are just like any other sect of the community that's super into something. You're just not going to shut them down. It's like you can't tell people who are super into guns to stop buying guns, or people who love skiing to not be super into, or climbing. Climbing's a good one. Climbing nerds are always going to be like, oh, there's this new thing that we got to have because it's an upgraded piece of, like any group of people like that that's super focused. You're not going to convince
He who
plant
dies
people
with the
to-
most gear wins.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Humidifiers are a simple one, in my opinion. You just have to educate the client as to what the house is supposed to be doing and give them the ability to measure in the house, put it on a thermostat.
So I'm so glad you mentioned that, because one of the problems is most people think they're accurately measuring moisture.
Yeah.
And, they're not even close.
Well, and even if we put it on the thermostat, it's only measuring where the thermostat is. Where's your thermostat?
Yeah.
My house has 4 thermostats. So which one do we count as what the house is?
You're lucky you get to see the difference in the moisture content from room to room.
Building materials, I actually applaud the fact that we're slow at building, that it takes us longer to build a house than a lot of people, because we have the opportunity that, like, my scope of work says that we're going to take moisture content reading on all the framing material before we start covering it up.
And Steve, you had a cool rule of thumb about how much moisture per month or something from concrete.
That was the concrete slab. Yeah, it's 1 month per inch
1 month per inch. Yeah.
of exposure.
That's a good one.
Which means if you're super into framing the house and then coming back and pouring the basement inside, you're making it that much even harder for you, because you got a month or two's worth of framing that you now cut out of the drying time.
Yeah, I mean, it was born out of using off-site wall systems, right? So they just show up. You frame the house in 2 weeks.
Yep.
Right.
After the slab is poured.
There you go. We're dried in, we're airtight, we have windows, and now we have a few hundred gallons of water that need to try to escape and not be absorbed into something else, that can be a problem. But it comes down to knowledge again, right? Like, if we're dehumidifying during the building process and we're taking measurements, we can resolve that no matter what our timetable is, as long as we're paying attention.
A few years ago, I consulted on a project. It was not a small house. The basement was probably close to about 200 feet long, maybe about 80 feet at its widest.
Not a small house.
A cottage.
A small little cottage. The basement wall was a 16-inch thick concrete wall that was 16 feet tall that sat on a 12-inch concrete slab.
Wow.
And then they were
This
doing
is a tank repair facility, apparently.
Yeah. Well, it isn't. It's quite the house.
It's a house.
But the builder was concerned because he was doing prefabbed wall system, and they were going to put it in. And I said, one of the problems you're going to have is you have this huge basement and you're going to cover up the house and have a roof on it in like 2.5 months. And it was a 28,000 square foot house, but they were going to close it in really quick. And so in our conversation on a call with the architect, I explained all this, and the architect goes, well, where do you think all this moisture is going to come from? And I was like, are you serious?
That's when you put your hand on top of the mic and go, are you kidding me?
Well, I just said, I don't know, maybe the 60 concrete trucks that are going to drive through the yard, maybe every drop of water that went in them has got to come out.
Yeah.
So it's baffling how much people don't quite understand.
It's interesting. About 50% of the moisture content of that concrete is part of the crystal structure that's created, but the other 50% is not. It's not bound. It's bound, but it's going to come out. So it's not a small
Water
amount.
of convenience is what they call that.
Oh,
it's water that makes it workable. That's it.
Water.
It's
I never
not
heard
water
that
for
before.
part of the chemical process. It's
Water of
just water
convenience.
to make it workable.
And Joe would always say they're going to make it wetter than it should be, the
probably
water
more
cement
water in there
ratio,
than-
because they want to make it more convenient.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that foundation, that's like, 20 houses, 20 normal houses.
Yeah,
16
worth of
inches
water.
thick, 16 feet tall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy. But
I just want to go back very quickly to plants, because one of my really early building investigation was a house that was 10 years old that had really serious rot up in the top of the building, and they were trying to figure out where it came from. And the builder was involved, but the builder got off the hook because after he built the house for them, about a year after, they added an 800 plant greenhouse to the side of their home and kept the door open during the winter.
Yeah, to share that temperature. And that moisture.
And that ended up to be one of the biggest culprits. Although there were some problems related to his work, he was off the hook because of that greenhouse.
So 2 things to add to your list of sources before we move on, because that you didn't touch upon. One, you're slightly touching upon it, Peter, is, when you have plants and any of the sources, the concentration of sources, I think, plays a role. Right? So that you can have 100 plants, but if they're dispersed around a 4,000 square foot house in every room, that's far less of a problem than if all of your plants are across the front living room window.
And actually, indoor air quality wise, it's probably a great thing if you have 100 plants dispersed over a 4,000 square foot house, because they do wonders for indoor air quality.
Yeah, you're somewhat equalizing.
They're zapping carbon monoxide and everything.
But the other thing there in the sources, I would add a thing called special conditions, right? I've done natatoriums.
Is that farting?
Houses.
Okay.
Right.
I'm doing a house right now where we're putting an endless pool in the fitness center. So
yeah, I don't build houses with pools, so I don't even think about the idea that people have the money to put one inside.
So yeah,
but you've worked with specialty contractors on
indoor
pools.
on the indoor pools. I mean, we have a pool. Believe it or not, I can't even spend more than about 10 minutes in there because the environment is so horrible. And horrible in a sense that for the average person, the homeowner loves it. The room is probably close to, it's at least in the high 70s, if not 80 degrees.
Well, the standard.
And the RH in that room is probably like 60, 70%. It's like very high. You can almost cut the air. And I can only spend a little bit of time. But the homeowner goes in there and goes, oh, I love this place. It's like a sauna.
Yeah.
And it's operating successfully in climate zone 5. And part of it is the pool company actually is the company that did the conditioning system. And we worked very closely with them on the insulation. So we have this collaborative effort where everything is tied together very well in understanding.
But they took full responsibility for the way that building works. Yeah, that's really cool.
So the last couple on there, outdoor air leaks, those are avoidable. Fix them. Like make it so that the house doesn't leak water. Make it so that the house is airtight. Poorly vented appliances. Can we just go to direct vent or combustion-free houses? Like there's no reason for us to still be using gravity vent appliances at this point. Grow up. It's time to get past that. And obviously, the pets are the same way as plants. You have to just plan for it.
I will say that there's like EcoFire, which is an unvented appliance that claims that, hey, you can do this because in a really tight house, you don't want to vent the appliance. And they claim, well, it's burning perfectly. It's only creating
Do we believe
heat
them?
and CO2. Well, they don't even talk about moisture as a byproduct of their fire. So that really got my hair on the back of my neck up because, you can't discount moisture. And people say, well, it's not generating that much. Well, it's a function of what's the tolerance of the building? What kind of ventilation system do you have? I know we're going to talk about ventilation coming right up after this because it's a big part of this. But if you don't know what the pollutants are, then you don't know what you have to ventilate to control.
Yep. VOCs, volatile organic compounds. That was like as much as like black mold was a pop word for a long time. I feel like VOCs was a pop word for a few years. I think all the VOC ones are completely avoidable. We don't store paints or aerosols or harsh cleaners inside. I didn't know that in my research for this, I didn't know that a lot of air fresheners put off a lot of VOCs. So that pine tree air freshener that you keep hanging in the bathroom is probably not doing a lot for VOCs, although it's pretty small. Gas, kerosene, dry cleaned clothing. If you wear a suit every day and you only wear it once and you get it dry cleaned, you might have a problem with indoor air quality. I had no idea as well.
And a huge one is home furnishings,
Yep.
The if you weigh a
fire retardant stuff in home
fire
furnishings.
retardant, if you weigh a vinyl shower curtain when you buy it, and then you go back and measure its weight 6 months later, it'll be 50% less weight because of all the VOCs coming off of that material.
And if you think about the same thing with like vinyl flooring, so all the luxury vinyl plank that's super popular right now.
Yeah, the VOC coming off that because it's the flexible vinyl that really has the VOCs coming off.
And you know that because of the same thing. When you go to take it out, it's brittle. But when you put it in, it wasn't brittle.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, what chemical change happened here? And it got rid of all the elastic material that's in it, you know.
The plasticizers.
Plasticizers, yep. And then another one that I learned when I was in college is basically everything that you have in a darkroom. That there were a lot of photographers at the beginning of the 1900s that had sicknesses related to breathing the chemicals in a darkroom. And all those photographers at that time had a darkroom in their house. And so like you can really have problems if you spend a lot of time around it because it is just chemicals.
I had an architect that I taught at Yale with who brought up an interesting one, which is she has a monitor in her space, and she was getting these blooms on a regular basis, and turns out it was the hand sanitizer that she was using at her desk.
Interesting.
A ton of VOCs coming off of that. So
we have to use hand sanitizer outside now? Is that what you're telling me?
She has like little holes in the window, and she just puts her hands out and does it outside, and then pulls them back in.
Source number 3 in my list of things, or problem number 3 is carbon monoxide, which again we have gas appliances, unvented gas appliances, or poorly vented gas appliances. I always think of my grandparents had a propane wall heater that my grandmother stood in front of all the time to get warm in the garage that they had finished into a living room in the 70s, you know. Wood burning fixtures. So like we were just talking about, stoves, could be a cooktop or coal burning. Didn't you tell me that you have a client that has a
stove that's still a
coal fire stove?
Coal burning stove in the kitchen.
Vehicles. This is that I'm going to close the garage door and try to run the car to take care of things the hard way or the easy way. Would that be the easy way? But people don't think about that, and you forget to turn the car off when you're carrying groceries in. You go to bed that night. Like that's a real issue if your house is poorly air sealed from the garage.
Steve, I forget who the client was, but maybe it was one of yours where there was an exhaust fan in the garage that was triggered by the garage door opener.
We did it with Palladero Homes. Every one of our garages, we had an exhaust fan that was triggered by motion. So
as soon as the door opened, it went on, and then it ran for a couple of minutes after the door closed.
It ran for a while.
Slick, right? Because slightly depressurizes space, but it doesn't matter. And that way, when you open the garage door,
it doesn't feed into the house.
It's a zone. It's a pressure relationship. There was a great video about a guy who had figured out how to do maybe he used theatrical fog as a substitute, but he showed what happened when you brought the car in, opened the door, and even and it just comes streaking across the floor, a large amount.
But that's true of the natatoriums and greenhouses too. Mm-hmm. They always want to be negative to the house.
Right.
So put a small fan in and have them, small bath fan costs you $20 a year to run, and just let it run 24/7, exhausting to the outside. So even if you open the door to the greenhouse or natatorium, that the air is always leaving the house, never entering the house.
When I was doing room by room remodeling, and my oldest daughter, Kate's asthmatic, the only way I could control dust moving from the space I was working on to her space was put a box fan in the window and ran it 24/7, and pressure was the way to keep the dust out of that. Yeah.
My last thing on carbon monoxide is tobacco smoke, which is like a duh. Like, oh, really? It's not good for you? And then radon is the number 4 for pollutants. We have episode 26 that we did.
I was going to ask if we've done that. Yeah.
Radon. And it's still obviously a good resource.
And just, Jake, carbon monoxide is the byproduct of combustion when it's not working right, and is highly toxic. But just carbon dioxide, is a natural outcome of combustion. But when we talk about ventilation, we're going to come back to carbon dioxide. I don't want to do that now. But
So I actually always reference something that Matt Reisinger told to me he showed me a like $200 indoor air quality monitor that was for sale on Amazon. And he was like, what are the chances your clients are going to end up buying one of these? And I was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And if they're way more informed, I need to be way more concerned. Like, obviously we should care about the indoor air quality for our clients, but the second that they have more information about the building than you do, the risk of you getting a phone call to resolve something goes up, even if it's just something that's like a minor comfort issue, not a real health issue. So we have to take it serious, and we have to be planning for it from the beginning. And that's why that conversation about go back to the podcast about the 4 control layers. We've been talking about this since, episode 4 or whatever that was that we started in on that. So what are ways that we deal with the other half of these other than the don't bring it into the house? If it's going to be in the house one way or the other.
Well, this is a tie into our next topic, right? Because it's going to have to be by ventilation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did want to say that in terms of IAQ monitors, the IQ Air Visual Pro, that's a $350 monitor. I got.
Is that the one you have?
It's the one I have, and I purchased it because the indoor air quality program, as part of the Efficiency Vermont program, the engineer who's in charge of that is a good friend of mine way back from South Face Institute days. South Face Institute in Atlanta. She's a great engineer, mechanical engineer. They looked at a whole bunch of different indoor air quality monitors and came up with the IQ Air Visual Pro because it was the most reliable and most cost effective for air temperature, relative humidity, PM 2.5, the particulate matter 2.5 in microns less, and carbon dioxide, measuring those levels. I asked her, I said, why don't you have a VOC sensor as part of yours? And she said, we never found one that stayed reliable. They're apparently pretty finicky, especially over time. And so she said, we just decided that we wouldn't keep track of that because it got too expensive to include that reliably. So I don't think that you shouldn't measure VOCs if you can, but it's just, I've talked to Lou Harriman about this, who has also done a lot of work on different types of sensors, and he said the same thing. He said, I'm not convinced that we have good measurement of VOC, so maybe that's one to skip.
Okay. Steve, do you have anything to add to this one?
No.
Gain control, stay in control. I don't underestimate the ability of plants either. You said the solution for most of these, if it's in the house, plants do a lot too. I mean, obviously the plant in my office isn't taking care of a radon problem, but
well, it is reducing your CO2 levels.
Yeah,
that's a good thing. Are we at the point for Pete's resource?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so it's tough because this is such a broad topic, but I'm going to do, which is sort of our default best resource. You go to buildingscience.com and search under indoor air quality. They have it as a special topic. You're going to come up with the best resources, I think, for every category that you chose there. And I just want to point out that when we haven't talked much about mold, and I get tons of questions about that all the time. I think Building Science Corporation has some of the best things on how to think about mold and then how to manage it. And a lot of those resources are back from when my brother Nathan Yost worked for Building Science Corporation, which means they're now probably 15 years old or even a bit more, and they still are some of the best resources. It was Joe Stiebrick, Terry Brennan, and Nathan Yost writing most of the materials on how to think about mold in buildings. So those are some of the top resources.
Okay. Final thoughts? No final thoughts, right?
No final thoughts.
Okay. Thanks for listening to the podcast today. Thanks for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the little bell button so you get a reminder when we publish something. And if you are an iTunes user, go to iTunes, leave a 5-star review. it helps other people find us. It's the most organic way that people can find us, other than the simple tell a friend method, which we also recommend. Till next time, have a good day.
And under this episode, feel free to help us with what your porn star name would be. And,
There you go.
a good thing to share.
Peter doesn't know what he's asking for. Have a good day.